the title of the album, which is called Operation Mindcrime. And what that is the code name for this plan that one of the characters has. And he, Dr. X, is trying to carry out this revolutionary plan. It's based in contemporary America, is where the story is based. And he sort of manipulates these two other characters to carry out his violent form of creating change. And Operation Mindcrime is the name of his plan. So he sort of capitalizes on the characters' weaknesses, like they happen to be, have drug problems and religious. They're very dependent on religion, and so he manipulates both of these angles to make them carry out his plan. And aside from all the depth and confusion of that story, we also just tried to write the best songs that we could and surround this story with very emotional, atmospheric music. So that we wanted to create our best songs that Queensryche has yet in a very violent and strange story.
Now that's the concise version.
What you just heard was Chris DeGarmo of the band Queensryche around 1988-89 explaining the plot behind their concept album Operation Mindcrime. Now, I'm sure a lot of you watching this have heard of Queensryche, but for those who have not, they did come from Seattle, and they started out in the early 80s, around 82. And they were playing what was considered somewhat original sounding, cutting edge, aggressive heavy metal. But they rapidly morphed into something more progressive and eclectic. This peaked with their classic concept album Operation Mindcrime, revered for its unique combination of cinematic drama and hard-edged melodic heavy metal. Although Operation Mindcrime was only modestly successful compared to larger acts of the day, Queensryche's follow-up Empire would see them shoot up to the top of the pop charts. But interestingly, the band then chose to play Operation Mindcrime in its entirety to their newfound audience, as if they hadn't already toured for it. In an interview in London from 1988 or 89, Chris DeGarmo has this very interesting thing to say here about a certain fan perspective. They come up and they say, Revolution Calling, is that happening in America right now? Are you planning a subversive revolution against the government? Do you want us to be assassins for you? And we just say, hey, we're just writing about cars and women and stuff. I mean, we got nothing against right-wing conservative fascists that run the United States. The story of Mindcrime is a fictional story. It's not an extreme version of reality. Though Jeff Tate seemed the unwitting spokesperson for Queensryche initially, it is easy to see why Chris DeGarmo seemed to quickly fall into that role. He was good-looking, articulate, quick, funny, intelligent, confident, yet surprisingly disarming in his demeanor. Because of this, one tends to just nod along in agreement with him, giving him the benefit of the doubt when he is vague or ambiguous. We like him. We trust him. But if we examine DeGarmo's quote, he really doesn't do a very good job at debunking the decidedly serious fan perspective he presents. Beneath his initial sarcasm is the obvious truth that they do write music about real topics, and it does reflect their feelings about right-wing conservative fascists running the country. To me, this seems to support the idea that the album is a call to arms of sorts. What does the word Queensryche even mean? And what were these young guys, in their late teens and early 20s, why were they fixated on this phrase? Well, it's not a real word. It was presumably invented by the band. Not sure what to call themselves. They were originally called The Mob, but I guess another band was called The Mob, so they had to change it. After Mob Rules, I guess, the album by Black Sabbath. They decided to take the title of Chris DeGarmo's song, Queen of the Reich, and abbreviate it into Queensryche. They changed the spelling of the word Reich to R-Y-C-H-E instead of R-E-I-C-H to, I guess, keep people from thinking they were Nazis or something. We'll talk more about that later. So a queen is the wife or widow of a king, a female monarch. A Reich is another word for realm or empire or kingdom, which is interesting when we consider that the album Empire by Queensryche was their biggest top-selling album by far. Had that song Silent Lucidity on it, which was their biggest song, I believe, that they ever put out. So an empire is a major political unit having a territory of great extent or a number of territories or peoples under a single sovereign authority. Think of the Roman Empire or the British Empire, or I guess maybe the Persian Empire. Great civilizations having jurisdiction over large territories. The monarchy of Canada is Canada's form of government embodied by the Canadian sovereign and head of state. It is at the core of Canada's constitutional federal structure and Westminster-style parliamentary democracy. The monarchy is the foundation of the executive, Queen in Council, legislative, Queen in Parliament, and judicial, Queen on the bench, branches of both federal and provincial jurisdictions. The Queen of Canada has been Elizabeth II since 6 February 1952. That's from Wikipedia. So when we think of an empire, I thought the Queen of England was the Queen of England and nowhere else. Well, her empire extends to Canada, apparently. So when we talk about building empires, this is one of Queensryche's videos that they put out, we're talking about expanding the Queen's Reich beyond its current borders. There are no queens in the United States, as we live in a constitutional republic. So why were these young American rockers promoting the Queen's empire through music in a territory where that influence was actually forced out during the American Revolution? Maybe they just thought it sounded cool, a unique name for a heavy metal band. Now, Freddie Mercury wore a British Royal Crown replica many times on stage during his band Queen's performances. Queen was originally signed to British label EMI, the same label that signed Queensryche in 1983 for their 7-album deal. Now, it helps to think about this within the context of, say, Game of Thrones. If you are the queen of an empire and your people are fawning and worshiping at the feet of some foreign rock and roller from another country, one which defeated your armies and forcefully claimed its independence from your kingdom, well, you better do something about that because, they're having an influence on your people. You want your subjects screaming for your own homegrown rockers, representing your own empire and your own interests. In fact, you want the world screaming for your own homegrown rock and roll representatives, don't you? Think the British invasion. The British invasion was a cultural phenomenon of the mid-1960s when rock and pop music acts from the United Kingdom and other aspects of British culture became popular in the United States and significant to the rising counterculture on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Pop and rock groups such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Zombies, the Kinks, Small Faces, Dave Clark 5, Herman's Hermits, the Hollies, the Animals, Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Searchers, the Yardbirds, the Who and Them, as well as solo singers like Dusty Springfield, Cilla Black, Petula Clark, Tom Jones, and Donovan. These bands were at the forefront of the invasion. So if you think of the movie Gladiator, all the influence that Russell Crowe's character had. He was a lowly, he went all the way from the bottom back up to the top by, kicking ass in the arena. So you see these entertainers, the icon of entertainer, they have influence over the people. When the people get invested in that entertainer's story, the drama, they manipulate the emotions of the people, unwittingly or wittingly. And when the powers that be notice that the emotions of the masses are controlled by this drama. So therefore, they understand that they need to control the drama by controlling the individuals who are involved in the entertainment. So, the term British invasion is an interesting term to ponder in your head and think about what it really means. Now, if you're a fan of the band Bathory, their first album has a yellow goat on the front. And legend has it that Quorthon the main guy in Bathory, wanted a gold-colored goat, but for whatever reason, gold wasn't available, so he chose the next best color, which was canary yellow. So the first few Bathory pressings were in canary yellow, and they're the most sought-after records of Bathory. So the reason I'm explaining that is that yellow is the closest color to gold. Was Queensryche shooting for gold here? I don't know, but they also have purple on here. And purple it's royal purple. It's a royal color. And I talked about this in other blogs. Think of Prince and his purple rain, royalty. And that's why Crown Royal, the Canadian whiskey, it uses the color purple and gold as well. Same reason. Crown Royal whiskey was introduced in 1939 by Samuel Bronfman, president of Seagram, as a tribute to the 1939 Royal Tour of Canada by King George and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, the first of the reigning monarch to Canada. So this whiskey was literally created to observe the King and Queen of England visiting Canada. So that tells you the kind of influence they have in other realms of their empire that are not necessarily in the vicinity of where they actually physically reside. And it remains one of the great whiskeys of Canada. It's the only Canadian whiskey I'll drink. And apparently Dimebag Darrell was a fan of Crown Royal as well. And the iconic QR shield you see here, that's a Q and a R. On the back of Queensryche EP has swords and a crown, a real expression of heraldry in the tradition of European royalty. Are these just some young rockers who watched Excalibur one too many times, or is there some type of larger influence here? Just under the logo is the peregrine falcon motif, which would later morph into the Reich symbol. The peregrine falcon is the fastest bird as well as the fastest animal on the planet. Bird wing motifs are very common in heraldic emblems. Now, if you've seen the kind of hilarious Queensryche video, Queen of the Reich, the first video they ever put out, it features a futuristic queen that is attempting to enslave the world using a computer and some sort of crystal technology. At the end of the video, Jeff Tate tears off the face mask from the then captured queen's eyes, and a blinding light flashes before them. The words "to be continued" appear across the screen. I'm sure many fans noticed that there was never a sequel to this story. Or was there? A brief note on this light. Look how they're all blinded by the light, okay? The Queensryche logo is actually, if you look at it, the original logo, which they only used for this EP, is made out of fire. And fire lights things up, right? And if you look for references to light, if you want extra credit here for your research, look at the song titles for the EP and the album The Warning, and look at the lyrics and look at how many references there are to light and darkness and fire. And I think you'll find that an interesting little journey right there. Was there a sequel to this story? Well, I don't know, but if you look at the cover of their first album, The Warning, what does it have? It has, is that the queen behind there with that weird mask thing, blasting light into your face? Is this some sort of cheap nod to where the video Queen of the Reich left off? Anyhow, note what looks like the planet Earth in the background, where a giant storm seems to have formed right there. Note also the peregrine Reich symbol on the corners of the card right here. So for The Warning, the record label EMI flew Queensryche to London to record with producer James Guthrie. Although Guthrie didn't seem to have much experience recording heavy metal, if any, he had already produced The Wall by Pink Floyd, making him one of the big-time rock producers of the day. The Wall is one of the biggest albums of all time and was already recognized at that time as such. I suppose EMI was just loaded with money because flying the band over to London to work with a producer who could charge top dollar in what would probably be top-of-the-line facilities, well, one could only assume EMI was expecting a return on this investment. I mean, they weren't just throwing their money at Queensryche for no reason. Here, Queensryche, we just believe in you so much. Here's Here's $1 million. Just have at it. We don't care if you make it, if you make a hit, or we don't care. We just believe in your heavy metal vision. So in Kerrang! Number 77, Chris DeGarmo said about The Warning, we came over to London to record with James because we thought that he would be valuable to work with, and he wanted to use London studios. We'd allowed 2 months to complete the record, but things kept on developing, with the result that we overran by a month, and that was working 12 to 14 hours at a stretch with very few days off. It was really exhausting, and when it came to mixing the results, I think we were all so drained that we failed to really capture what we'd done. We needed to be very fresh for the mix, and we weren't. The label really cares and wanted very much to get it right. So that's why I'm down here now in LA. It's really working out well, and everyone's very pleased with what we've got. We're getting really excited about the album again. So this is Chris DeGarmo. He's kind of like the voice of the band. Like as I said earlier, he's very calm and intelligent. He comes off as very intelligent and charismatic, and you just trust him. And this is why they have DeGarmo providing damage control here, because that's a pretty big deal when you spend all that money to fly the band over to London, and you work with this top producer, and you couldn't get it right, and you had to go a month over, over schedule. And what's going on here? And DeGarmo's reassuring everyone, it's cool. Hey, we got it. I'm in LA, I'm remixing it with this other guy, and everything's cool. And then right after this, in the same Kerrang! Interview, or article, whatever you want to call it, they quote Jeff Tate as saying, "It's great that the label is prepared to give a new band the time and the opportunity to get the record exactly straight. They could easily have insisted on releasing just what we had, but the support we've had from them has been excellent. We're very fortunate that they trust us and believe in us." Now, the Kerrang! Article kind of sets up that quote of Jeff Tate's as if to say it supports what Chris DeGarmo just said. But Jeff Tate's quote could easily have been taken out of context. He could have been saying this just in general. Anyway, this Kerrang! Article came out obviously before the Warning album had been released. Clearly, there were problems with the initial mix in London. So, according to Blabbermouth and AnybodyListening.net, the album's original track sequence and sound mix that the band had approved was changed by mix engineer Val Garay under orders from EMI America, against the wishes of the band. The band first learned of this in August 1984 while on tour in Japan. So, wait a minute, hold on. So, we just saw a quote from Chris DeGarmo in Kerrang! Where he was like, yeah, I'm in LA and everything's great, and I'm with Val Garay, and we're remixing it correctly because we didn't do it right in London. Everything's going great, and we're all getting excited about it. So that kind of says that the band knows what's going on, right? But this article, this source is saying that the band first learned about it while they were on tour in Japan, which I believe would have been after this article came out. So what's really going on here? Something isn't right, okay? And years later, just a few years ago, this is what Jeff Tate said to Blabbermouth. "The only time I ever experienced a record label restricting creative freedom was during the recording of Queensryche's first album, The Warning. We went $300,000 over budget, and the label took the record out of our hands and gave it to someone else to mix." So this is sounding very different than what we just heard them saying back in 1984, right? "The guy that mixed the album had no clue what Queensryche was. He never listened to hard rock music and didn't take input from anyone in the band. He just mixed it according to how he thought it should sound. No one in the band could listen to that record. We all hated it." So think about all the money this all cost. Flying the band to London, paying for lodging and food, paying the producer, studio, engineers, going $300,000 over budget. If 1 month was $300,000, how much was it? $300,000 each month? Would that have been nine? I mean, are we talking about $1 million here? I mean, this is crazy. They're throwing all this money at Queensryche, this young band that never even played in clubs before they got signed. And you also got to consider that in 1984, $300,000 was a lot more money than it is today. EMI refused to accept the original mix, And they spent additional money to pay for another person to remix it, whose claim to fame was working with Kim Carnes. Kim Carnes was known for the hit Betty Davis Eyes, not metal or even hard rock. Regardless of how much money EMI had floating around, I can't see them dumping so much cash into the band without expecting a return on the level of Pink Floyd or Kim Carnes. Otherwise, why were they giving them these non-metal producers? What other reason were they doing this than to try and, extract hits of that type from, Pink Floyd and Kim Carnes type out of this total heavy metal band that was singing about science fiction and mystical ladies in black and fire and all this kind of stuff, artificial intelligence. What they ended up with was basically an abstract cult metal classic that only a handful of people in the world would truly appreciate. This might explain the band's drastic shift in sound and image for the next album, Rage for Order, which they so admirably explain away with the term No Limits. In other words, when you look at Queensryche's pictures, or Rage for Order, and they all look like vampire transvestites from the future or something, what are they thinking? Well, you ask Queensryche, they say, well, no limits, right? That's our credo. We'll do anything. So, it's like, it sounds very admirable and artistically true, but at the same time, no limits can also include completely selling out. Oh, well, this time we're going to completely sell out because we have no limits. We're not going to limit ourselves, right? It seems the ultimate goals of the band and the label were not very clear or necessarily in alignment. Yet Kerrang was out there making sure the opposite perception was given. The band even seemed to play into the misinformation to a degree at times. Perhaps as we continue to look at the big picture here, it will all start to make more sense, but no promises. If you look at the original Queen logo as it appears in the first album, you see that they've got a crown right on there. And you can see the little fleur-de-lis in there as well. And it's kind of similar to this motif that we see on The Warning, Queensryche's album, where they've got the crown. Obviously, it's the theme of the band because the word Queen is in the name, but I'm just pointing out the repetition here. Why are they pushing this? And you can see right there, that looks like the Peregrine, Tri-Reich prototype, that little bit right there that's kind of mimicking this, this cross thing on the crown, rendered more accurately to the original crown in the Queen logo. And here I found this really cool program that yperano.com, I think it was, posted that they had gotten at a show. At the shows, at rock shows, they used to hand out these programs with these, different pictures and just cool stuff to look at while you're at the concert. But interestingly, on the back of the program, you can see that the Tri-Reich symbol was fully formed already, just as it would appear on the cover of Rage for Order the next, year or two later. So they already had it all worked out at that point. The spelling Queensryche was modified to prevent association of the band with Nazism. Reich, R-Y-C-H-E, is a Middle English cognate to Reich, R-E-I-C-H, which, like the German word, can mean realm, kingdom, or empire. The name Queensryche is written with a metal umlaut over the letter Y. So they're saying that they changed the spelling of Reich to this other way because they were afraid people would think Third Reich or something like that, I guess. And my theory about the umlauts is that they're supposed to conjure up the idea of an apostrophe because this is possessive, the Queensryche. If you take the title of this blog and you separate the word Queen and Reich and you say the Queensryche, well, it's possessive. It's saying it's the empire that belongs to the Queen's empire. So that's my theory about the umlauts. It's some kind of right brain thing, but I could be wrong. The thing about the band not wanting to be associated with Nazism is very contradictory when we consider the fact that their main symbol, the Tri-Reich symbol, what does Tri-Reich mean? Well, tri means three, T-R-I, and Reich, Third Reich. What is the Third Reich? That's the Nazis. So they're playing around with words in a way that it's difficult to deny the wordplay that they're doing here, is what I'm saying. Jeff Tate was born in Stuttgart which was then part of West Germany, to American parents. I'm not saying Tate was a Nazi. I just thought I'd throw that in there with all this German stuff. Perhaps he had a preoccupation with German topics due to being from there. I believe Tate has also said that he's part black, which sounds really kind of crazy if you've never heard of it before. But, it could be true. He could be, maybe one of his grandparents was black. Apparently, the Tri-Reich symbol gets credited to both Wes Griswold, rest in peace, he's passed away, and Scott Rockenfield's brother, Todd, both of whom I couldn't really find much of anything about. And you see here, you can find this online just by Googling it. It's this document talking about the Tri-Reich Corporation, which is the corporation that the band had. At some point, Queensryche formed a corporation called Tri-Reich, after the symbol of the same name. All 5 members would have equal shares, as I understand it from the Tate versus Wilton Jackson Rockefield court documents. I'm talking about the documents that you can find online associated with the breakup of Jeff Tate from the rest of the band. When DeGarmo quit, that left 4 core members, which would be Tate, Wilton, Jackson, Rockenfield. A big beef in the court documents had to do with Tate allegedly forfeiting his share when he behaved in a manner leading to his being voted out of the corporation by the 3 other members. And we're talking about what Jeff Tate did in Brazil. He was spitting on other band members on stage. He, I guess, punched a couple of them. He was physically assaulting them. So the court ruled in the favor of the other 3 guys. Interestingly, this reduced the corporation down to a true Tri-Reich, or 3 members of an empire. Again, I have to wonder if anyone involved with this court case pondered this Third Reich association. How come nobody was going, hey guys, what is this third, why are you, why is your corporation and your main symbol called more or less the Third Reich if you want to avoid association with Nazism? There's just something very odd about that that's kind of undeniable.
No, I think fortunately when our record company EMI signed us, they did so with in mind that we were going to be an act that would establish ourselves over a number of albums, and I don't think we certainly aren't expected to concentrate around hit singles. Through very heavy touring and just continuing to make records, that's our strength in continuing to sell records. I think the band's accessible as far as the airwaves go, but that's up to the programmers as well. And we have some our management situation is in the process of changing, so we're working on that, which is part of the reason why some of our headlining shows that we had initially scheduled for Europe have been rescheduled.
So let's remember that the first 2 Queensryche recordings, the EP and the Warning, the full-length Warning, were very much rooted in traditional heavy metal. And we're talking about the European variety, the Wizards and Warriors and science fiction and castles and kings and queens and all that. We're not talking about the LA American variety that was selling tons of albums, cocaine and partying and sex and drugs and rock and roll, okay? Queensryche was the former, or so we thought. And one would think that EMI coming in with all this money and dumping it into the band's album would have matched them up with producers that would bring out the best heavy metal in the band. But as we saw with The Warning, they kind of mismatched them with a producer that was big name and expensive and all that, but that didn't really understand the band and therefore yielded a product that, a cult fringe probably found really brilliant. As I said, people like myself and a growing number of heavy metal fans out there. But, to put all this money into the band only to mismatch them and not really achieve any kind of major mainstream success, not getting kind of any return on their investment, what do they do next? Well, I think the picture you see in front of you is the result of the decision-making process of the record label and the management. And Michael Wilton kind of backs this up in an interview that he did a few years later where he sort of tongue-in-cheek called this their romantic vampire look. And you can see Jeff Tate's face. He looks disgusted. I mean, do they look comfortable in their outfits there? This kind of all of a sudden, we're going in the direction of glam with their image, and even a few of the songs on Rage for Order have kind of a decidedly more glam feel. They're talking more about love and normal things that a glam rock band would talk about. Yet they're injecting all these other abstract elements as well. Kind of futuristic sci-fi, political themes, and real heavy-duty kind of gothic atmospheres. And I mean, frankly, I think it's a brilliant album. But I think the brilliance that is captured on Rage for Order has less to do with the band's intentional efforts than it might seem on the surface. I think it's more of an accident of these different colliding forces. And because these guys are just so talented, they manage to, marry all these awkward elements and awkward influences and mold it into something completely unique. But I think the takeaway that I want to highlight here is that there are forces outside of the group putting a lot of pressure on them. And as DeGarmo stated in the interview we just saw, he's discussing the fact that they're in the process of changing management. And this is while they're touring for Rage for Order. So, I mean, if things were going great and perfect and all that, why would they be changing management? On May 29th, 1986, according to Amazon.com, Oxford University Press put out this book by Joel Williams called A Rage for Order. Oxford University Press is one of the oldest presses in England. And I went and looked at a calendar from 1986. According to that calendar, the album Rage for Order was released exactly 30 days after that book was released. Rage for Order was released on June 27th, 1986, according to Wikipedia. So, unless that calendar was wrong, there was exactly 30 days between the release of this book and the release of this album of the same name, both released by British companies. In this case, EMI America, which is a subsidiary of the British label EMI. I'm not going to try and explain what the connection might be between this book and this album. Maybe there isn't a connection. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I just thought that was a pretty strange coincidence. Now, you look on the cover of Rage for Order and you see this symbol, the Tri-Reich symbol, the Third Reich symbol. And it's kind of shooting up from the planet Earth. Where did we see this before? We saw it on the back of the program that Queensryche handed out on their Warning tour for their first album. What warning is this? And we see that these rays of light are coming out of this being's eyes. And I made an association between that and the Queen of the Reich video, which ends with Jeff Tate tearing the mask off the face of the Queen, and this light shoots out of her eyes, presumably. And look, it's blinding them all, and it says to be continued. And now we see the face of whatever it is that's shooting light out of its eyes. I sort of see this as some type of symbolic sequel to the Queen of the Reich video. And you can see the mouth almost looks like it has lipstick on it, kind of like the mouth you see on the Queen in the Queen of the Reich video. So I don't know. I know this is a bit abstract, but we're doing some sort of right brain free association here with the symbology. And I don't think it's an accident that this light appears to be shooting up from the Earth. And then you see the Tri-Reich or the peregrine symbol that turned into the Tri-Reich symbol on the corners of the card. So it's all being combined together here, all the symbology. And of course, the Queen's crown. So a connection, I believe, is being made between the light coming from the Queen's eyes and this symbol jutting up from the Earth, which I always thought this looked kind of like the bat symbol, the Batman symbol, which is also the result of light shining up on the clouds, right? And if we do think of this in terms of the bat symbol, a sort of light that shines up calling Batman, or in this case, calling the Queen, or I don't know what, If we look at where it's coming from, well, it looks like it's coming from Great Britain. You see there's Africa, and there's a piece of land, and the light appears to be, or the symbol, the Tri-Reich, the Third Reich, seems to be coming up from just above that piece of land. If we look at a map here, here's Africa. Here's that point sticking out of Europe, Spain and France, and just above that is the United Kingdom. So I don't know. I don't think that's an accident. So you put it all together, and what do you get? You get light shooting from the eyes of the Queen from her empire in Britain, jutting up above the planet Earth and forming this Third Reich, this empire. And we've got a map of the whole world behind it, giving the impression of something like, I don't know, the United Nations logo or something. You just get the feeling that there's some big plan here behind all this. That's the feeling I get from it. Now, that big plan might just be a record label trying to use a band to have a marketing campaign and make some money and make some hits. But as we've discovered by going over some of these details already of the band and the music and the money being put into it, it's not really clear what the goal is here. It kind of seems a little confused. Are they trying to make hits? Are they trying to help the band see their artistic vision through? Are they trying to promote heavy metal? Are they trying to subvert heavy metal by first introducing the band as total heavy metal and then sort of subverting it and putting in these weird glam outfits and writing this weird music with these weird sound collages and stuff? You know, what is this? What's really going on here? Is this some kind of weird, a new version of, is this some kind of new manifestation of the British invasion by using an American band? If we look again at this British royal crown, we see these symbols here, which are, I believe, are the fleur de lis, is what it's called. And here's a different version of it. In French, fleur and lis mean flower and lily respectively. It is used as a decorative design or symbol. The fleur de lis has been used in the heraldry of numerous European nations, but is particularly associated with France, notably during its monarchical period. It occurred to me that the Queensryche Tri-Reich symbol may have been partially influenced by the fleur de lis as well. Queensryche's major commercially successful album, Empire, prominently embedded the name of their record label, EMI, within the title Empire. What does this mean? Who does this? You know, you've got the record label embedded in the word Empire with the Tri-Reich, the Third Reich jutting out of it, and the name emblazoned over it. Is this EMI asserting its ownership and responsibility for the finished product? Who really runs Queensryche? Who really runs a lot of these bands? Are the band members just the frontmen for a larger social control operation? Are they unwitting participants? Are they witting participants? Were they witting participants at one point, but then kind of got out of it?
We've had, I think, the chance to tour with all those acts, and we learned a lot.
That's right.
From playing.
And you had actually toured with Kiss, played with Maiden, Dio.
Yeah.
But before that, you were really on the local circuit, weren't you, in Seattle, I think?
Actually, no, we've never played live before.
Really? You went straight onto one of these massive tours?
Well, it wasn't a massive tour. I think the first show we played was 4,000 people, something like that.
Mm.
If you notice during this interview in England here, where this guy is completely kissing their asses, in the background it says, another Mick in the wall. I guess that's this guy's name is Mick. But notice the Pink Floyd reference, The Wall. The guy who produced that album is the same guy who produced Queensryche's first album. And also, you know, take into account the fact that Queensryche, you know, although we're gaining a bigger following with each tour and with each album, they weren't exactly killing it. I mean, they still didn't have anything near, you know, a big hit on the radio, or, you know, they had not attained the level of Iron Maiden, or, you know, they weren't really a headlining band yet. But this guy's just completely kissing their asses, and he's basically like, at the beginning of the interview, he's basically like, you know, you guys are amazing and great and awesome, and what do you think of that? You know, it's like, it's not even a question. It's like he's presenting it as if it's an established fact, and they're just supposed to go, yeah, you know, we are great. We are amazing. You know, I don't know. It feels there's something kind of forced about it. I mean, how did an obscure underground heavy metal band from what was at the time an obscure part of the country for heavy rock music manage to bypass the club circuit completely, play to 4,000 plus, and, obtain a major record deal right away? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad they did. I'm a fan, but it just seems a bit odd. So getting into the origins of how this all happened, the group recorded the 4 songs that are on the EP, and for an entire year they brought their demo to various labels and were rejected by all of them. Kim Harris, manager at the time, sent the demo tape and a band photo to a friend who wrote for Kerrang! Magazine, resulting in a glowing review. After the EP garnered international praise, receiving much airplay and selling an unusual number of copies for a small independent release, Tate agreed to leave his other band, Myth, and became Queensryche's permanent lead singer. England's Kerrang! Magazine is one of the most influential heavy metal magazines in the world. Although the band's raw talent surely didn't hurt, it seems it was the British magazine's praise of Queensryche's humble EP that was probably the most responsible for their initial boost in popularity, leading to larger gigs and a major record deal with a notably British major record label, EMI. And here's I think the first big feature in Kerrang! On Queensryche here, which had a lot to do with them being hyped up and being turned into this big important band, even though it may not necessarily have reflected the reality of it. It's kind of Kerrang! Was putting them on a pedestal, which is their job, right? It's their job to tell you these are the bands that are hot, but who's really financing it all? What is it motivated by? Is it just about an industry, making money, profiting off of these bands, or is there a larger influence in the ideologies of these bands, the lyrical content, the influence on fans of different countries and different cultures? And note that there's 2 bands with the word Queen in the name on this album, on this magazine cover, Queensryche and Queen. As we approach the end of this blog here, I want to revisit the quote that I had from Chris DeGarmo in the beginning, where he says, talking about fans, they come up and they say, revolution calling, is that happening in America right now? Are you planning a subversive revolution against the government? Do you want us to be assassins for you? That fan perspective right there that Chris DeGarmo presents, that's pretty much what I'm trying to address here in this blog. That's kind of the crux of it. So the album Operation Mindcrime begins with sounds from a hospital. And we hear a woman with an American accent is paging doctors over a loudspeaker. We then hear a nurse with a British accent entering a room, where the TV is broadcasting a news story by a man with an American accent, reporting on a man being held in a hospital, who seems to be Nicky, the main character in the story. So it sounds like we're in America, but a British nurse is checking in on Nicky to give him a shot. She calls him a bastard under her breath, so she is obviously not looking to fix him up with that shot, and why is the nurse British? On that note, so is Dr. X, the cult leader that Nicky is following. He has a British accent. He's a British guy. It's also curious that Jeff Tate also seems to use a slight British accent on spoken sections of the album. For example, this lyric in the song Spreading the Disease, selling skin, selling God, the numbers look the same on their credit cards. Okay, notice how I said cards. I didn't rhyme it with God, but on the album, Tate rhymes God and cards. Well, if you're from Seattle, and almost anywhere in America, you don't say cods. I mean, if you're from the East Coast or from the ghetto, you might say cods, or you might sort of elongate that A, but you don't really get to cods unless you were British. The numbers look the same on their credit cards. And then I threw in this fish reference here from an early Jeff Tate interview where he says that we all met strangely and mysteriously in a fish and chips restaurant, and we were all there one night. That's a weird little story that Jeff Tate tells. Speaking about the band just all coming together in a fish and chips restaurant randomly one night and deciding to, let's form a band or something like that. Now, I found this book called The Intern, published originally in 1965. The author's name is Dr. X. Apparently, this was a pen name or pseudonym for a guy named Alan Norse, who was a fairly well-known science fiction writer. In fact, he wrote a book called The Blade Runner in 1974. And although the story is not related to the film of the same name, the name itself was directly lifted. It was actually a Philip K. Dick story called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sleep? I think that was the actual story that the movie Blade Runner was based on, but for whatever reason, the title was taken from the Alan Norse book. In 1960, Alan E. Norse, who was an intern at Virginia Mason Hospital, wrote The Intern. It was published by Harper and Row in 1965 under the pseudonym Dr. X. That's from Wiki. So what is the significance of this book, The Intern by Dr. X? It's basically comprised of nonfiction diary entries written by Alan Norse while he was an intern at a hospital in Seattle. And this is not revealed in the book itself. When the book came out, locations and names were changed, but it came out later that he was actually in Seattle, in a Seattle hospital, Virginia Mason Hospital. If you look that up, you can verify it. I did read the book, and I couldn't really find any relevant information on this topic other than the connections already mentioned, the fact that a guy named Dr. X wrote it, and then it takes place in a hospital in Seattle. And obviously a hospital is where Operation Mindcrime begins. I mean, the album begins at the end, right? Doesn't it? So, I don't know, maybe Jeff Tate or someone else involved with the band came across this book while they were sort of brainstorming the story.
What was your day job?
I worked in a hospital. I was all the supplies that come in. I was sort of in charge of a storeroom, stocking all these things and keeping track of them, unloading deliveries and that sort of thing.
Your first brush with drugs.
Yes.
Good drugs.
Is there anyone in the world today who you think closely resembles Dr. X, or is he based on any real figures?
Well, I guess it started out to be based on a group of people that we met when we were up in Montreal, who were sort of involved with overthrowing their government and ousting all the English-speaking people and bringing in sort of a French-controlled new government. And quite an interesting night drinking with these people and hearing their viewpoints. Anyway, that was sort of the inspiration for Dr. X, and I think we just sort of took it from there and expanded on it.
Is there some lesson you want people to walk away with from this album?
The character of Dr. X is played by Anthony Valentine, a British actor. If the idea of the character was influenced by some French Canadians who hate speaking English, why was the character presented as one whose native tongue is English? And given that the story presumably takes place in America, why would a British guy be trying to radicalize and recruit despondent American youth for a revolution and to overthrow the American government? I know it's really easy for me to sit here and ask these questions, but that interview that you saw, Jeff Tate answering those questions, was one of the only ones that I saw where the interviewer was really making an attempt to kind of get to the bottom of what the band was really consciously trying to do with the album. And although the band is very good at answering the questions very sensibly and seemingly very detailed, I feel like the band is really good at kind of drawing a line and only going so far in answering their questions. And I think this has to do with the fact that there is some type of agenda behind it, and either they're not aware of it or they're maybe partially aware of it and they're trying to provide cover and they're the face for all of it, or completely in on it. I don't know. There's this interesting book called Operation Mind Control out there by Walter Boert that I highly recommend reading if you're interested in, these topics of the CIA and MK Ultra and things like this. It's kind of a scary book, but I think it's really important to read because when you subject yourself with this type of information and you approach it with an open mind, you don't have to just believe all of it automatically, but force yourself to read it, even if it's uncomfortable, and check out what it says and double check the information that's in it. And if you find that it's true, well, you've learned something. If you find that it isn't true, you've learned that it's, have you really wasted your time? Well, no, but you can say you checked it out and you verified that it's false. A lot of people these days, if they just don't like the sound of something or it makes them uncomfortable, they call it disinformation or bullshit. And that contributes to ignorance in society. Double checking and verifying whether something is fact or not, despite how nice or how bad it sounds or how many of your friends think it's true or false. I mean, verifying information for yourself makes you a smarter person and makes your society smarter and more grounded in truth. LA Times was quoted as describing Queensryche as a metal band best known for a concept album about a Manchurian Candidate-style brainwashed assassin. That was how they interpreted Operation Mindcrime. This quote right here, where Chris DeGarmo explains the background of Operation Mindcrime, this is taken from that video that we saw in the very beginning of this blog. So go ahead and review it if you like. And after Rage for Order was recorded and while they were touring or when they were done touring, they split from their original management team and signed up with Q Prime, who also had Metallica and a lot of other big bands. I think AC/DC and Def Leppard. And it was headed by this guy, Peter Mensch and Cliff Bernstein. So when Metallica toured with Queensryche in 1988-89, by the way, the tour kicked off on September 11th, 1988. I don't know why September 11th is such an important, weird date, but there you have it. A lot of people were confused by the pairing, including myself. Although I was a fan of both bands at the time, Metallica did not have the mainstream appeal that they have now. In fact, heavy music in general was not as accepted back then as it is now. Metallica and Justice for All was considered a very extreme album, almost on the level of like death metal would be, 10 years later. They didn't have any happy Enter Sandman type songs yet, And, Queensryche was closer to progressive hard rock or glam at that point. So putting them both together initially was kind of like, why are you forcing these two groups together? It doesn't work. But if you look at the subject matter, there is actually a big match. If we just take a look at the lyrics from And Justice for All, the title track of the Metallica album, justice is lost, justice is raped, justice is gone. Pulling your strings, justice is done. Seeking no truth, winning is all. Find it so grim, so true, so real. Very good, very dark lyrics on that album. And then we look at Revolution Calling on Operation Mindcrime. I used to trust the media to tell me the truth, tell us the truth. But now I see the payoffs everywhere I look. Who do you trust when everyone's a crook? So we get this, although the bands are very different sonically, the two bands seem to complement each other quite well in their social commentary. Both seem to view America in specific as a very dark, corrupt place. Us younger fans of darker, heavier music tended to agree, I suppose. Especially those of us who perhaps did not have the best upbringings or did not fit in so well with society. We were probably the most likely target audience of this music, if there was such a thing. But the question is, were the bands reflecting our views, or were our views reflecting theirs? Were their views really theirs at all, or those of their financiers? Were we all just responding naturally to the dark realities of the world, or were the dark forces manifesting themselves at our concerts, striving to drive us towards darker and darker extremities, and to our ultimate demise? Could some potential world power have its eye on destroying America and the constitutional freedom we enjoy through entertainment by creating a culture of cynicism so consumed with reactionary emotion that we became less rational and discerning of our world? A mob of loose cannons reacting to the latest controversy of the day. A mass of rage in need of order. Are these mass shooters we're seeing the Nickies of today? Are these radical groups intimidating people and causing destruction in the streets the Dr. X cults of today? Are these satanic, overly sexualized, racially militant, Illuminati symbol-decorated artists of today the new Mindcrime operations? There's a revolution calling, all right, but maybe the change we need is one back to some sense of normalcy, rather than total misguided upheaval.
What do you think, Jeff?
I don't know. I've always sort of held this opinion that the media has a real extreme effect on people, and there's a responsibility from the media to approach, what they do seriously, and try not to, let those temptations take over. And you can, if you really look into what's on TV nowadays, there's a lot of really, I don't know, sort of bizarre images, I guess you could say, that come across, and it's hard not to think that somebody's not thinking of mind control or some sort of
Programming or something.
It's just too coincidental not to look at a little critically.
So we try and avoid all those techniques when recording our albums. Things like
backwards maskings.
No subliminal messages on our records.
Was The Wall or Tommy an influence for you at all in writing the album?
I think those are very old albums and ones that we sort of grew up with, and I think, I don't know, to approach doing something like The Wall or Tommy is it's quite an effort, and I really don't think we came close as far as putting out something as massive or conclusive as those two albums, especially. But I think
certainly nice stars to sort of shoot towards.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.